The smell of gunpowder still hung in the air as Hazel Armstrong lowered her rifle, her steady hands betraying none of the storm that raged within her. 3 men lay sprawled in the dusty street of Redemption Creek. Their weapons still clutched in lifeless fingers would be bandits who'd made the fatal error of thinking the lone figure guarding the Wells Fargo stagecoach was just an easy mark in a dress. "Good Lord, miss," breathed the astonished driver, climbing down from his perch. "I ain't never seen shooting like that outside the Wild West shows." Hazel methodically reloaded her Winchester, her face expressionless beneath the wide brim of her hat. "Stage is safe now. You can get these folks to Silverhorn on schedule." The year was 1878, and Redemption Creek was just another dusty stop along the expanding frontier of the American West. The town had sprung up around silver mines that had since dried up, leaving behind a place populated by those too stubborn or too broke to leave. Hazel counted herself among the former. "Miss Armstrong," called out Sheriff Dawson, hurrying down the boardwalk. "That's the 3rd time this month. I can't keep explaining away dead outlaws, even if they did draw first." Hazel holstered her rifle in the saddle's scabbard. "Then hire better deputies, Sheriff. Wells Fargo pays me to make sure their shipments get through." The sheriff's weathered face creased with concern. "A woman shouldn't be doing this kind of work." "I'm no lady, Sheriff," Hazel replied flatly. "Never claimed to be." As she mounted her dun mare, the commotion had drawn a small crowd, including a tall figure leaning against the post outside the telegraph office. Isaac Reed watched the exchange with interest, his blue eyes taking in everything about the woman who just dispatched 3 armed men without breaking a sweat. "She works for the stage company," the telegraph operator volunteered, noticing Isaac's interest. "Best shot in 3 counties. Cold as ice, though." Isaac nodded thoughtfully, watching as Hazel rode out of town. He'd come to Redemption Creek tracking a gang of cattle rustlers, following their trail from his ranch in Wyoming territory. The Broken R had lost nearly 100 head in the last month alone, and the local law had been useless. So Isaac had saddled up and followed the trail himself, as he'd been doing since his father died and left him the ranch 5 years ago. "You looking for work?" the operator asked. "Because rumor has it the stage company might be hiring guards for the Silver Trail run." Isaac smiled slightly. "No, sir, just passing through on business." He tipped his hat and headed toward the saloon. He needed information, and saloons were always the best place to start. The Rusty Nail was like every other frontier watering hole, dim, smoky, and populated by men who'd seen too much of life's harder side. Isaac ordered a whiskey and took it to a corner table, settling in to listen to the local gossip. An hour later, the batwing doors swung open and Hazel Armstrong walked in. The room quieted noticeably as she made her way to the bar, her boots leaving dusty prints on the wooden floor. "Whiskey," she told the barkeep, who poured without comment. Unlike most women who might venture into such an establishment, she wore men's clothing, practical canvas pants, a faded blue shirt, and a worn leather vest. Her chestnut hair was tied back in a simple braid, and her green eyes surveyed the room with practiced caution. Isaac watched as she knocked back her drink in one swallow, then signaled for another. When a drunk cowhand attempted to approach her, she fixed him with a stare that stopped him cold from 10 feet away. Isaac couldn't help but smile. He rose and approached the bar, careful to leave plenty of space between them. "That was some shooting earlier," he said casually, ordering another whiskey for himself. Hazel glanced at him, assessing. "Just doing my job." Isaac Reed, he offered, came down from Wyoming tracking some rustlers. "Wyoming's a long way to track men. So is hell, but I'd chase them there too if I had to." He smiled slightly. "They've cost me nearly 100 head. Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. There was no bravado in his words, just simple fact. "You own your spread." "The Broken R, been in the family 3 generations," she nodded, respect flickering briefly in her eyes. "Hazel Armstrong, I work security for Wells Fargo. I noticed." He gestured to her empty glass. "Another," she hesitated, then nodded. "Why not? I'm not on duty till morning." They moved to a table, bringing the bottle. For a time they drank in companionable silence, two people accustomed to their own company, comfortable with quiet. "How'd a woman end up guarding stagecoaches?" Isaac finally asked. Hazel's eyes hardened slightly. "Same way anyone does." "I'm good with a gun and I don't scare easy." Didn't mean any offense, just curious. She studied him a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "My father taught me to shoot when I was 8, said a woman on the frontier needed to defend herself. When he died in '72, I found out he'd gambled away everything but his guns. Had to make my way somehow." Isaac nodded. "My father died in a blizzard 5 years back, found himself on the wrong side of the property line when the storm hit. I took over the ranch the next day. You run it alone. Got about 15 hands, good men." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "But these rustlers are causing problems I can't afford." Hazel's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "You think they're local?" Trail led here. "Been asking around discreetly, but no one's talking." "People here mind their business," she agreed. "But I hear things on the stage routes. There's a new outfit operating out of the old Morrison place about 20 miles north. Keeping mostly to themselves, but they seem to have an awful lot of cattle for men who didn't bring a herd with them." Isaac leaned forward, his interest piqued. "You sure about that?" "Sure enough to mention it," she replied. "But you didn't hear it from me. I've got to work these routes." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the door. A group of men had entered, trail-worn, hard-looking men with the dust of the range still on their clothes. "That's them," Hazel said quietly. "Dalton Crew. The one in the sheepskin vest is Tyler Dalton. Other 5 are his brothers and cousins." Isaac kept his face neutral as he glanced over. "Appreciate the information. What are you planning to do?" "Nothing tonight. Just watch, listen. I'm not looking for a shootout." Hazel snorted softly. "Noble, might get you killed, though." "Maybe," he shrugged. "But shooting first has a way of making a man guilty regardless of the truth." She studied him over the rim of her glass. "You're an unusual cowboy, Isaac Reed. And you're an unusual woman, Hazel Armstrong." For the first time, a hint of a smile touched her lips. "I told you I'm no lady." Isaac's eyes met her steadily. "Then be mine, and that'll be enough." The words hung between them, startling them both with their directness. Hazel's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. "You don't know me," she said flatly. "No," he agreed, "but I'd like to." She stood abruptly. "I've got an early stage to guard. Good luck with your rustlers." She laid a coin on the table and walked out without looking back. Isaac watched her go, wondering what had possessed him to say something so forward. He wasn't a man given to impulsive declarations. Yet something about her competence, her directness, her solitary nature that seemed to mirror his own had prompted words he hadn't even known were in him. He returned his attention to the Dalton Crew, memorizing faces and listening to their boisterous conversation. They were celebrating something, spending freely. One of them mentioned cattle prices in Colorado, and Isaac's suspicions deepened. He'd heard Colorado buyers were paying premium for stock, no questions asked. By the time he left the saloon, he had a plan forming. But it would require patience and possibly help. The next morning found him at the stage depot as the early run to Silverhorn was preparing to depart. Hazel was already there, checking her weapons as the passengers boarded. "Morning," Isaac greeted, approaching carefully. "Got a minute?" She glanced up, her expression guarded. "Make it quick. Stage leaves in 10. I'm headed out to look over the Morrison place. Thought you might want to know I'll be in the area the next few days." She nodded curtly. "Thanks for the heads up." "Also," he continued, "wanted to apologize for being forward last night. Wasn't my intention to make you uncomfortable." Hazel looked at him directly then, her green eyes assessing. "No need to apologize, but I'm not what you're looking for, cowboy. I've made my choices." "Fair enough." He tipped his hat. "Safe travels, Miss Armstrong." As he turned to go, she called after him. "Reed," he paused. "The Morrison place has good sight lines from the North Ridge, but watch for their scouts near the creek crossing." He nodded, understanding the warning for what it was. "Obliged." Isaac spent the day gathering supplies and information. By mid-afternoon, he'd rented a sturdy bay gelding to complement his own mount and packed enough provisions for several days of observation. The general store owner, seeing his preparations, offered some advice. If you're heading north, might want to steer clear of Morrison Valley for a few days. Dalton Boy's been mighty territorial lately. Appreciate the warning, Isaac replied noncommittally. Just doing some exploring while I'm in the area. Your funeral, the storekeeper muttered, counting out change. Isaac left Redemption Creek as the sun began its westward slide, taking the north trail at an easy pace. He made camp several miles out in a sheltered draw that offered both concealment and escape routes. Tomorrow he would scout the Morrison place from the ridge Hazel had mentioned. As he sat by his small fire, eating a simple meal of beans and jerky, Isaac found his thoughts returning to the woman. There was a story there more than just a father's death and financial necessity. The kind of wariness she carried came from deeper wounds. He'd seen it before in men who'd fought in the war, that careful vigilance that never fully disappeared even in supposed safety. What had happened to put that same look in Hazel Armstrong's eyes? Morning came with the soft gray light of dawn. Isaac broke camp efficiently, obscuring all signs of his presence before continuing north. By midday, he'd reached the ridge overlooking Morrison Valley. The old homestead sat in a natural bowl of land with good water and grazing. It had been abandoned after old man Morrison died in '74, the family moving back east. Now, however, it showed signs of occupation: smoke from the chimney, horses in the corral, and what looked like a substantial herd of cattle in the valley pasture. Isaac stretched out on the ridge with his field glasses, counting cattle and men. What he saw confirmed his suspicions. Many of the cattle still bore different brands from different ranches, including his own Broken R. And there were more men than Hazel had indicated, at least 10 that he could see. He spent the day observing the operation, noting patrol patterns and routines. It appeared they were gathering stock from various sources, altering brands, and then moving them out in smaller groups, presumably to Colorado buyers. It was a well-organized operation, too well organized for a simple confrontation. Isaac knew he'd need help either from the law or from others with a stake in stopping the rustlers. As the sun began to set, he carefully withdrew from his observation post and headed back toward Redemption Creek. He was about 2 miles from town when he heard the thunder of approaching hooves. Quickly, he guided his horses into a stand of cottonwoods beside the trail, drawing his Winchester from its scabbard. The stagecoach burst into view, moving too fast for safety on the rutted trail. Isaac could see the driver frantically working the reins, and then he spotted the pursuers. 5 riders gaining ground, guns drawn, and on top of the coach, returning fire with methodical precision, was Hazel Armstrong. Without hesitation, Isaac leveled his rifle and fired, dropping the lead pursuer from his saddle. The others faltered, suddenly caught in a crossfire they hadn't anticipated. "Ambush," one of them shouted, and they scattered, abandoning the chase in favor of self-preservation. The stagecoach continued past Isaac's position, then slowed as the driver recognized the assistance. Hazel's eyes locked with Isaac's across the distance, a moment of silent acknowledgement passing between them before the coach rumbled on toward town. Isaac didn't follow immediately. Instead, he approached the fallen outlaw, confirming the man was dead with a bullet through his chest. Searching the body, he found nothing to identify the man, but his gun belt bore the same distinctive tooling he'd seen on several men at the Morrison place. By the time Isaac reached Redemption Creek, the town was buzzing with news of the attempted robbery. He stabled his horses at the livery and headed for the sheriff's office, where he found Hazel giving her report. 4 men, she was saying, wearing bandanas over their faces. They came out of the cut by Eagle Rock demanding we stop. When the driver whipped up instead, they opened fire. Sheriff Dawson nodded wearily. "Any idea who they were?" "No, but they weren't amateurs. They knew exactly when and where to hit us." "The Wells Fargo shipment." "Payroll for the Silverhorn mine, 30,000 in gold." The sheriff let out a low whistle. "That kind of money they'll try again." Isaac cleared his throat from the doorway. "One of them won't." Both turned to look at him. "Got one clean through the chest when I came upon the chase," Isaac explained. "The others scattered." Hazel's eyes narrowed. "You're supposed to be at the Morrison place." "Was on my way back," he addressed the sheriff. "Body's about 2 miles out, just past the creek crossing. And I've got information you might want to hear about cattle rustling." For the next hour, Isaac detailed what he'd observed at the Morrison ranch. The sheriff listened with growing concern. "That's a bigger operation than we can handle with just me and my 2 deputies," Dawson admitted. "Especially if they're behind these stage robberies too." "You could telegraph for federal marshals," Isaac suggested. "Take days for them to get here. By then, those rustlers could clean out half the territory." Hazel, who'd been silent throughout Isaac's report, finally spoke. "Or we could handle it ourselves." Both men looked at her. "I've got another run to Silverhorn tomorrow," she continued. "Same shipment, same route. They'll hit us again, but this time we'll be ready." "That's mighty risky," the sheriff began. "So is letting them continue operating," she countered. "They know the schedules, the routes. That means they've got someone feeding them information. We need to end this now before they get stronger." Isaac nodded slowly. "She's right, and I've got a personal stake in this." "Those are my cattle they're stealing." The sheriff looked between them, then sighed heavily. "What did you have in mind?" By the time they left the sheriff's office, night had fallen over Redemption Creek. The plan was set. Hazel would make the run as scheduled, but with Isaac and the 2 deputies hidden inside the coach. The sheriff would follow at a distance with a posse of trusted townsmen, ready to close in once the ambush was sprung. "You're taking an awful risk," Isaac said as they walked toward the hotel. "Using yourself as bait." Hazel shrugged. "It's my job, and I don't much like being shot at without returning the favor." "Fair enough." He hesitated outside the hotel entrance. "Buy you dinner." "Figure we should discuss details more." She considered him for a long moment, then nodded. "The cafe across the street has decent food. Meet you there in 20 minutes. The cafe was quiet, with only a few patrons at that hour. They took a corner table and ordered steaks, speaking in low voices about the plan for the next day. "I counted at least 10 men at the Morrison place," Isaac said. "If they're all in on this, we could be outnumbered." "They won't all come," Hazel reasoned. "They'll need to keep some men with the herd, and they won't be expecting resistance inside the coach." Their food arrived, and they ate in companionable silence for a time. Isaac found himself studying her when she wasn't looking the confident way she handled her knife, the alert eyes that never stopped scanning the room, the small scar along her jawline that spoke of violence survived. "You're staring," she said without looking up. "Sorry," he smiled slightly. "Just thinking you must have quite a story." She met his eyes then. "Everyone out here does. What's yours?" "Pretty straightforward. Third-generation rancher. Father built the broken R into something worth having, and I aim to keep it that way." "Wife, children," he shook his head. "No time for that. Ranch keeps me busy enough." "So why the interest in me?" she asked directly. Isaac considered his response carefully. "Because you remind me of this country, beautiful but dangerous, self-sufficient, doesn't suffer fools." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "That's quite a line, Cowboy." "Not a line, just an observation." He set down his fork. "Your turn. What's your story beyond what you've told me?" Hazel's expression closed slightly. "Like I said, father died, left nothing but debts I had to survive, and before that." She was quiet for a long moment. "I was engaged once to a cavalry lieutenant stationed at Fort Laramie. He died in '73 in a skirmish with Sioux raiders." "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago." She took a sip of coffee. "After that, I decided I'd rely on myself." "No attachments, no disappointments." Sounds lonely. Sounds practical. She set down her cup with finality. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow we'll come early." They walked back to the hotel in silence, the weight of the coming day's dangers settling around them. At the staircase, Hazel paused. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for your help today with the stage. Couldn't very well ride by. Most men would have." Her green eyes held his for a moment. "Good night, Isaac Reed." "Good night, Hazel." He watched her climb the stairs, her steps light despite the day's violence, and felt something stir within him that had nothing to do with tomorrow's plans and everything to do with the woman herself. Dawn arrived with a cold clarity that promised a hot day to follow. Isaac was at the stage depot early, checking his weapons and conferring with the two deputies who would accompany them, young men named Parker and Donnelly, both looking nervously determined. Hazel arrived last, dressed as always in practical men's attire, her rifle slung over her shoulder and two revolvers at her hips. She nodded to Isaac but spoke first to the stage driver. "Same routine, Clancy. Act like it's any other run. When they show themselves, you keep driving until I give the signal to stop." The old driver nodded grimly. "Yes, madam." The regular passengers had been informed of a security concern and advised to take the next day's stage. The coach would carry only the Wells Fargo strongbox, Hazel on top with the driver and the hidden lawman inside. Sheriff Dawson approached as they made final preparations. "Posse is ready. We'll hang back about half a mile. When we hear gunfire, we'll come running." Isaac nodded. "If it goes as we expect, they'll hit us at the same spot as yesterday. Eagle Rock Cut gives them high ground and cover." "Be careful," the sheriff cautioned. "These aren't ordinary bandits, they're organized and desperate." "So are we," Hazel replied, checking her Winchester one last time. They departed on schedule, the coach rolling out of Redemption Creek with its unusual cargo of armed men and determination. Isaac sat inside with the deputies, the shades drawn to conceal their presence, guns ready across their laps. For nearly an hour they traveled without incident, the coach swaying along the rutted trail, dust filtering in through every crack. Then Isaac felt the change in pace. They were approaching the cut. He tensed, catching the deputy's eyes and nodding. The first shot came as a warning, kicking up dust in front of the team. Isaac heard Hazel's voice ring out from above. "Keep driving, Clancy." More shots followed, and the coach lurched as Clancy whipped the team to greater speed. Through the window shade, Isaac could see riders appearing from the rocks, closing in on both sides. "Stop the coach or we shoot the horses," came a shout. "Now, Clancy," Hazel called, and the driver hauled on the reins, bringing the stage to a jolting halt. "Throw down the strongbox." The same voice demanded. Isaac tensed, hand on the door latch, waiting for Hazel's signal. "Come and get it yourself," she shouted back. That was it. Isaac flung open the door and rolled out, rifle ready, as the deputies burst from the other side. Immediately, the air filled with the thunder of gunfire. Isaac caught one bandit in his sights and fired, seeing the man tumble from his saddle. Beside the coach, Hazel had dropped to one knee, picking her targets with methodical precision. Two more outlaws fell under her aim. The remaining bandits, suddenly finding themselves in a trap, tried to retreat, only to encounter the sheriff's posse riding hard from behind. Caught between two forces, they had nowhere to go. "Drop your weapons," Sheriff Dawson's voice boomed. "You're surrounded." For a moment, it seemed they might surrender. Then one of them, a man Isaac recognized as Tyler Dalton, made a desperate move, wheeling his horse around and firing wildly as he charged directly at the stage. His target was clear: Hazel, who was reloading her rifle. Isaac shouted a warning and fired, but his shot went wide as he was forced to dive away from another outlaw's bullet. Hazel looked up just as Dalton bore down on her. With no time to raise her rifle, she drew her revolver instead, but Dalton was already upon her, his horse slamming into her and sending her sprawling in the dust. Isaac scrambled to his feet, heart in his throat, as Dalton wheeled his horse around for another pass. But before he could reach Hazel again, she rolled to her knees and fired 1, 2, 3 shots in rapid succession. Dalton jerked in the saddle, then slowly toppled to the ground, his horse galloping away riderless. The fighting ended quickly after that. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader fall, threw down their weapons and surrendered. The sheriff and his posse rounded them up while Isaac hurried to Hazel's side. She was already standing, dusty and bruised but otherwise unharmed, calmly reloading her revolver. "You all right?" he asked, unable to keep the concern from his voice. She nodded. "Takes more than that to keep me down." He wanted to say more about how his heart had stopped when he saw her fall, about the strange and powerful feelings that had been growing since their first meeting, but this wasn't the time or place. Instead, he helped secure the prisoners and recover the body of the outlaw he'd shot earlier. By mid-afternoon, they were back in Redemption Creek. The surviving bandits were locked in the jail, and Sheriff Dawson was preparing to lead a larger force to the Morrison place to round up the rest of the gang. "I want you both with us," he told Isaac and Hazel as they sat in his office. "You've earned the right to see this through." Isaac nodded his agreement, but Hazel hesitated. "I've got another run tomorrow," she said. "Wells Fargo will understand," the sheriff interrupted. "Besides, there's a reward for these rustlers. Both of you have claims on it." In the end, she agreed, and they set out the next morning with a force of 15 men, the sheriff, his deputies, Isaac, Hazel, and 10 determined townsfolk who had lost cattle to the Dalton gang. They approached the Morrison place cautiously, but found their caution unnecessary. Word had somehow reached the remaining gang members and they had fled, leaving behind nearly 200 head of stolen cattle with various brands. "They can't have gone far," the sheriff said, surveying the abandoned ranch. "We'll organize search parties, send telegrams to neighboring towns." Isaac walked through the deserted buildings with Hazel, taking inventory of what had been left behind. In the main house, they found ledgers detailing the gang's operations, names of buyers, records of stolen stock, even plans for future robberies. "This is bigger than just cattle rustling," Hazel observed, flipping through the pages. "They were building something here, a criminal enterprise." Isaac nodded grimly. "And using the proceeds to finance other operations like the stage robberies." They brought their findings to Sheriff Dawson, who whistled low as he examined the ledgers. "This'll keep the federal marshals busy for months, names and connections all through Colorado and New Mexico territories." The next few days were a flurry of activity. Ranchers from throughout the area came to claim stolen cattle. Federal marshals arrived to take charge of the prisoners and the evidence. And Isaac found himself lingering in Redemption Creek, ostensibly to oversee the return of his stolen stock, but in truth because he wasn't ready to leave Hazel. They spent their evenings together, sometimes at the cafe, sometimes walking along the creek for which the town was named. Slowly, piece by piece, Hazel's story emerged: how her father had been a gambler and a dreamer, always chasing the next big strike. How her fiancé's death had left her adrift until she found purpose in her work for Wells Fargo. How she had taught herself to survive in a world that offered women few choices. In turn, Isaac shared his own life, the weight of responsibility he'd inherited with the broken R, his dreams of expanding the ranch, the loneliness of command that had been his constant companion since his father's death. 5 days after the raid on the Morrison place, they stood on the small bridge over Redemption Creek, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I'm leaving tomorrow," Isaac said quietly. "Need to get my cattle home. Ranch has been without its owner too long." Hazel nodded, her face unreadable in the fading light. "It's been an interesting partnership." "It has." He turned to face her fully. "I've been thinking about what happens next." "What do you mean?" "I mean this." He reached out slowly, giving her time to step away if she chose, and took her hand. "I meant what I said that first night, Hazel. I'd like you to be mine." She stiffened slightly but didn't withdraw her hand. "Isaac, I told you, I know what you told me. That you're no lady, that you've made your choices, but circumstances change, people change." "Do they?" Her voice was soft, almost wistful. "I've spent 5 years building this life. I'm good at what I do. And you could be good at other things too," he said gently. "I'm not asking you to become someone you're not. I'm asking you to consider a life where you don't have to face everything alone." She was silent for a long moment, looking out over the water. "I don't know how to be what you want. You already are what I want." He squeezed her hand lightly. "Strong, capable, direct. I'm not looking for someone to cook my meals and darn my socks, Hazel. I'm looking for a partner, someone who stands beside me, not behind me." She turned to look at him then, her green eyes searching his face. "You're serious, dead serious," he smiled slightly. "Come back with me to the Broken R, not as my wife, not yet anyway, as my partner. See the place, meet my people. If you hate it, Wells Fargo will still be here. Your people won't accept a woman like me. My people will accept whoever I bring home," he said firmly. "Especially one who helped recover their stolen cattle." Hazel looked away again, conflict clear on her face. I need time to think. Of course. He released her hand reluctantly. I leave at noon tomorrow. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. That night, Isaac hardly slept, his mind racing with possibilities both hopeful and disappointing. By morning, he had resigned himself to returning to Wyoming alone, carrying the memory of Hazel Armstrong as nothing more than a brief but meaningful encounter in his life. He settled his bill at the hotel, collected his horses from the livery, and made his final preparations for the journey home. At the general store, he purchased additional supplies, including a book, a recent novel he'd noticed Hazel reading in the evenings. As noon approached, Isaac led his horses and the small herd of recovered cattle to the north edge of town, where the trail to Wyoming began. The sheriff and several townspeople came to see him off, thanking him for his role in bringing down the Dalton gang. "You're welcome back anytime, Reed," Sheriff Dawson said, shaking his hand. "We owe you." "Just glad to help," Isaac replied, his eyes scanning the street one last time, hoping for a glimpse of chestnut hair and determined green eyes. There was no sign of Hazel. With a heavy heart, Isaac mounted his horse and prepared to give the signal to move out. "You weren't planning to leave without me, were you?" The voice came from behind him, and Isaac turned in the saddle to see Hazel approaching on her dun mare, a packed saddlebag behind her and her rifle in its familiar scabbard. "Wouldn't dream of it," he said, unable to keep the smile from his face, though I was beginning to wonder. She guided her horse alongside his. "Had to settle things with Wells Fargo. They're holding my position for 3 months. 3 months seems like enough time to decide if Wyoming suits me," she said simply. Isaac's smile widened. "And if it does?" Hazel's lips curved in a rare full smile that transformed her face. "Then I suppose I'll have to find a new line of work. I hear ranching needs someone who can shoot straight and doesn't scare easy." "Among other qualities," he agreed, his heart lighter than it had been in years. As they rode north out of Redemption Creek, side by side with the small herd of cattle before them, Isaac glanced at the woman who had so unexpectedly changed his life. "What made you decide to come?" he asked. Hazel considered the question, the Wyoming sun highlighting the auburn undertones in her chestnut hair. "Something you said, about being a partner, not just a wife, about standing beside you, not behind." She met his gaze steadily. "No one's ever seen me that way before." "Their loss," he said simply. She nodded, then looked ahead to the trail that would take them north to a new life. "I should warn you, I still don't cook very well, and I definitely don't darn socks." Isaac laughed, the sound carrying on the clear western air. "I think we'll manage just fine." The journey to the Broken R took 2 weeks, traveling at the pace of the cattle. They fell into an easy rhythm, sharing the duties of the trail, making camp, tending the stock, standing watch. At night, they talked by the campfire, learning each other's stories in greater depth, discovering the common ground beneath their different paths. Isaac learned that Hazel could play the harmonica with surprising skill, a talent inherited from her father. She discovered that he had a passion for books, carrying volumes of Twain and Whitman in his saddlebags for the quiet hours. They faced challenges together: a swollen river that required a detour, a young steer that fell ill and needed nursing, a brief encounter with a group of Shoshone hunters that ended peacefully thanks to Isaac's knowledge of their language and customs. Through it all, something grew between them, a partnership based on mutual respect that gradually, inevitably, deepened into something more. The first time Isaac kissed her was at a campsite beneath the stars, the fire burning low, their conversation having turned to hopes neither had dared voice before. "I'm still not sure I'll fit into your world," Hazel admitted, her usual confidence momentarily faltering. "You don't have to fit into my world," Isaac replied, reaching out to touch her cheek. "We'll build our own." When his lips met hers, Hazel felt something unlock within her, a door she had closed after her fiancé's death, believing it safer to live without such vulnerability. Yet here, with this man who saw her strength as an asset rather than an aberration, she found herself willing to risk that opening again. The Broken R came into view on a clear autumn morning, sprawled across a verdant valley with the Wind River Mountains rising behind it. The main house was a substantial log structure with a wide porch, smoke curling from its chimney. Nearby stood a bunkhouse, barn, corrals, and various outbuildings that comprised a working cattle operation. As they approached, men emerged from the building's ranch hands curious about the returning boss and his unexpected companion. "Mr. Reed, welcome back," called a gray-haired man who stepped forward from the others. "We were starting to worry." "No need, Thomas," Isaac replied, dismounting. "Mission successful, as you can see." He gestured to the recovered cattle, then extended his hand to help Hazel down from her mare, a courtesy she accepted, despite being perfectly capable of dismounting on her own. "Everyone," Isaac announced to the gathered hands, "this is Miss Hazel Armstrong. She was instrumental in recovering our stolen stock and bringing the rustlers to justice. She'll be staying with us for a time." The men touched their hats respectfully, though Hazel could read the questions in their eyes, questions about who exactly she was to their boss and what her presence meant. Thomas, who Hazel soon learned was the ranch foreman and had known Isaac since boyhood, approached with an outstretched hand. "Miss Armstrong, any friend of Mr. Reed's is welcome at the Broken R." "Thank you," she replied, shaking his hand firmly, "and it's just Hazel." The first few weeks at the ranch were a period of adjustment for everyone. Hazel moved into a small cabin that had once housed the previous foreman, refusing Isaac's offer of a room in the main house. "Let's not give your men more to talk about than they already have," she'd said practically. Isaac had agreed, though he spent most evenings with her anyway, continuing the pattern they'd established on the trail, sharing meals and conversation as the autumn days grew shorter and the nights cooler. Hazel quickly made herself useful around the ranch. Her skill with horses was evident, and she took on the task of breaking some of the newer colts. Her marksmanship impressed even the most skeptical hands when she joined a hunting party and returned with more game than anyone else. Still, she was aware of the whispers and curious glances. A woman in men's clothing, handling a gun better than most men, clearly having some special relationship with the boss. She was an anomaly in their world. "Give them time," Isaac advised when she mentioned it. "They're good men. They'll judge you by what you do, not what they expected." He was right. As October gave way to November, Hazel found her place in the rhythm of the ranch. She rode fence lines, helped with cattle, and even assisted the cook when an extra pair of hands was needed, though her culinary skills remained limited at best. The turning point came unexpectedly, on a bitter cold morning when one of the hands, a young man named Billy, was thrown from his horse during a routine patrol of the north pasture. The animal had spooked at a rattlesnake, sending Billy crashing into a boulder. His leg was broken, and he lay in agony nearly 2 miles from the ranch house. Hazel was the first to reach him, having been checking fence posts nearby. Without hesitation, she fashioned a splint from fence slats, gave Billy her coat against the cold, and rode for help. When the doctor later said that her quick actions had likely saved not just Billy's leg but possibly his life, the last barriers of reservation among the ranch hands fell away. "You've won them over," Isaac observed one evening as they sat on her cabin porch, watching the stars emerge. "I wasn't trying to win anyone over," she replied, but there was satisfaction in her voice. "Just doing what needed doing. That's why they respect you, same reason I do." He took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. "The 3 months are almost up, Hazel." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I know. Have you decided about Wyoming?" Hazel looked out over the ranch, the place that had gradually, almost imperceptibly, become home. "I think Wyoming suits me just fine, and the ranch too." She turned to meet his gaze. "And its owner most of all." Isaac's smile was like sunrise. "Does that mean you'll marry me then?" "Is that a proposal, Cowboy?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "It is." He shifted to face her fully. "I love you, Hazel Armstrong, not despite who you are, but because of it. Will you be my wife, my partner, my equal in all things?" Hazel felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the wool blanket draped across their laps. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will." Their wedding took place on Christmas Day, 1878, in the main house of the Broken R. The ranch hands cleared the large front room, decorating it with pine boughs and red ribbons. The local minister came out from town, along with several merchants who had become friends with Isaac over the years. Sheriff Dawson made the journey from Redemption Creek as their special guest, bringing news that the last of the Dalton gang had been captured and the stolen cattle returned to their rightful owners throughout the territory. Hazel wore a dress for the occasion, a deep green velvet that matched her eyes, ordered specially from Denver. But true to her nature, she kept her revolver strapped to her thigh beneath the skirt, a fact that made Isaac laugh when she confessed it to him later. "Would expect nothing less," he said, kissing her as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. Spring came to Wyoming with its usual capricious nature, warm days followed by sudden snowstorms, the promise of new growth battling the lingering grip of winter. The Broken R thrived under the combined leadership of Isaac and Hazel Reed. Their partnership brought new ideas and efficiencies to the operation, and by summer they had expanded their herd and hired additional hands. Hazel never did learn to cook particularly well, but she discovered other domestic talents, a knack for organization that transformed the ranch's record-keeping, and an unexpected gift for gardening that turned the neglected plot behind the main house into a productive source of vegetables and flowers. Isaac, for his part, found in Hazel the companion he hadn't known. He was missing someone who challenged his thinking, shared his burdens, and understood both the rewards and demands of the life they'd chosen. In July of 1879, nearly a year after their first meeting in Redemption Creek, they stood together on the porch of the main house, watching a summer storm roll across the valley. "I have news," Hazel said, her voice carrying a note Isaac had never heard before, something like wonder mixed with apprehension. He turned to look at her, noting the unusual flush in her cheeks. "What kind of news?" "The kind that means we'll need to prepare a nursery by winter." Her hand moved unconsciously to her still flat stomach. "Dr. Matthews confirmed it yesterday." Isaac stared at her for a moment, processing her words, then let out a whoop that startled the horses in the nearby corral. He lifted Hazel off her feet in an exuberant embrace. "Careful." She laughed, though her arms tightened around his neck. "I'm in a delicate condition, or so the doctor tells me." "You're the strongest woman I've ever known," Isaac said, setting her gently back on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "This child is lucky to have you as a mother." Hazel's expression softened, a vulnerability showing that few besides Isaac ever witnessed. "I don't know the first thing about being a mother, and I don't know about being a father," he replied, "but we'll figure it out together like we do everything else." She nodded, leaning into his embrace as the first drops of rain began to fall. Together. Their daughter, Sarah, was born on a cold February morning in 1880, entering the world with a lusty cry that, according to the midwife, boded well for a strong constitution. She had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined chin, a combination that suggested she would be a force to reckon with in her own time. Motherhood changed Hazel in ways she hadn't anticipated. The fierce protectiveness she felt for her child was both familiar and entirely new, similar to the vigilance she'd cultivated as a stage guard, but deeper, more primal. Yet it didn't diminish her other strengths. By the time Sarah was 6 months old, Hazel was back in the saddle, sometimes with her daughter securely bundled against her in a specially designed carrier. The years passed, bringing both challenges and joys. The winter of 1881 was brutal, with blizzards that threatened the herd and tested the mettle of even the most seasoned ranchers. But the Reeds weathered it, their partnership proving resilient in the face of adversity. In 1883, they welcomed a son, Thomas, named after the loyal foreman who had by then become like family. The following year brought another daughter, Emma, completing their family. Through it all, Hazel and Isaac maintained the balance they had struck from the beginning, a marriage of equals, each respecting the other's strengths and compensating for weaknesses. They worked side by side, raised their children with love and firm guidance, and built the Broken R into one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Occasionally, news would reach them from Redemption Creek. Sheriff Dawson retired in 1885, replaced by his youngest deputy. The town had grown, prospering from a new silver strike in the nearby mountains. In the summer of 1888, 10 years after their fateful meeting, Hazel and Isaac made the journey back to Redemption Creek for the town's founding day celebration. They took their children, Sarah, now 8, Thomas 5, and Emma 4, eager to show them the place where their parents' story had begun. The town had indeed changed, with new buildings along Main Street and more permanent structures replacing the earlier frontier establishments. But the Rusty Nail Saloon still stood, and as they passed it, Isaac squeezed Hazel's hand. "Still remember the first time I saw you walk in there," he said. "Thought to myself, there's a woman who knows her own mind." Hazel smiled, the years having softened some of her edges while strengthening her core. "And I remember thinking you were either the bravest or the most foolish cowboy I'd ever met, offering to buy me a drink." "Which was it?" he asked, grinning. "Still deciding," she teased, leaning into his side as they continued down the street. That evening, after the children were asleep in their hotel room under the watchful eye of Sarah, who took her role as oldest very seriously, Hazel and Isaac walked to the creek bridge where he had first asked her to come to Wyoming. The water still flowed beneath, constant yet ever-changing, much like the life they had built together. "Any regrets?" Isaac asked, slipping his arm around her waist. Hazel considered the question, thinking of the woman she had been: solitary, wary, defined by her gun and her independence. Then she thought of who she was now: still strong, still capable, but connected to a family, a home, a purpose larger than survival. "Not one," she said honestly. "You, only that it took me 30 years to find you," he replied. They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the water and the distant sounds of the town's celebration. Then Hazel turned in his arms, her green eyes finding his in the gathering twilight. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing who I really was, even when I couldn't. For knowing that being no lady didn't mean I couldn't be yours." Isaac smiled, brushing a strand of hair now threaded with the occasional silver from her face. "Being mine was never about changing you, Hazel. It was about finding where we fit together." "We fit pretty well, I'd say," she murmured, rising on her toes to kiss him. Above them, the first stars of evening appeared in the Wyoming sky, witnesses to a love that had begun with an unexpected meeting and a bold declaration, and had grown into something as enduring as the land itself. In the years that followed, the Reed family continued to thrive. Sarah grew into a young woman with her mother's independence and her father's thoughtfulness, eventually attending college in Denver, a rarity for women in that time, but unsurprising to anyone who knew her parents. Thomas followed in his father's footsteps, learning the ranching business from the ground up, while Emma displayed an artistic talent that led her to study painting in San Francisco. The Broken R expanded under Isaac and Hazel's guidance, adapting to the changing times as the frontier gave way to statehood and the new century approached. Through it all, they remained partners in the truest sense, facing life's challenges and celebrating its joys together, their bond only strengthening with time. And if sometimes, on quiet evenings, Hazel would take out her old Winchester and clean it with the same meticulous care she'd shown in her days as a stage guard, Isaac would simply smile, knowing that the woman he loved had not fundamentally changed. She had simply found a way to be both the independent spirit who had caught his attention and the devoted wife and mother who had captured his heart. For in the end, she was right, she was no lady, at least not by the restrictive standards of their time. She was something far more valuable, a woman of courage, conviction, and love, and for Isaac Reed, that had always been more than enough.